Hello, this is Saint-Ire, and today I have some speed paints of Sabine, one of my nearest and dearest OCs. And along with those speed paints, I have an introduction to the story that she belongs to. It's very much a work in progress at the moment, but it's been incredibly fun working on something super different from what I'm used to. I haven't written anything in a very long time, so it's kind of refreshing. Anyways, if you have any thoughts, please let me know. Sabine was grateful for what little of her life she could control. She kept her hair long to plait it differently every morning, even if it was hidden under her veil. She ripped the hem of her sleeping gown well above her knees. She snuck a tin of rouge, forgotten by a laywoman, under her pillow to wear late at night. She would press the deep red pigment into her cheeks and across the high bridge of her nose, wrap her woolen blanket over her shoulders, and pad down the brick and stone hallway to a familiar door. Warm arms would drag her into the room, and she would drift through the night, feeling as though her life truly was her own. Sabine thought of those things often, most often during the morning hours, sat in the chapel shoulder to shoulder with the other veiled women. Her sisters' voices, gentle and quiet, echoed after the abbess as she led a rote morning prayer. The words were easy, practiced, and Sabine murmured into her clasped hands a final amen to end the prayer. At the dismissal of the Mother Superior, Sabine and the others rose from the wooden pews and filed silently from the modest chapel with their heads bowed. The convent she spent her days in was undeniably beautiful. New and modeled in the style of pre-Reformation spires and high ceilings, she could feel the grandeur of the whole complex, even in the most mundane areas. The towering brick and stone walls were sturdy, if a bit oppressive, and provided a sense of safety and refuge. Only recently were restrictions against the open practice of Catholicism and the building of convents and cathedrals in the Roman style lifted, and a small swarm of holy women flitted across the country in need of homes. The buildings were splendid, no doubt due to the charitable donations of recent landowning converts, and Sabine could not forget the awe she felt early in her stay. Were she only visiting, Sabine thought, she would be entirely enamored with the impressive architecture. But the years of wandering the grounds, with the rest of her life hanging like a loose beam over her head, made Sabine feel caged. The bars were gilded, but bars nonetheless. She did not take her position for granted, nor did she truly loathe her parents for their choice to send her away. They spoke often of their parents' flight from France to escape the intellectual violence of the country, and Sabine knew they sacrificed much to raise their only daughter. One of only 2 surviving children, she was well loved and raised to be thankful for everything given to her. It was that love, she believed, to be why, when they caught her kissing the Protestant girl that lived 2 streets down, they sent her to begin her novitiate in Liverpool. Her mother knew she feared the thought of having to marry a man, even if she could not understand why. But there were few options for a girl like Sabine. If she were to marry Christ, however, then she would never have to bear the touch of a man or the birth of a child, and could live her life with a fraction of independence. It was not perfect, but there were crueler fates her parents could have placed upon her, so she always wished them good health in her nightly prayers. Sabine was quiet as she walked from the chapel. Her mind was on tonight. She would be sitting vigil overnight in the infirmary, alone. The infirmeress was away, making a house call with Father Hughes, the handsome parish priest from nearby St. Peter's. She wasn't worried, and her nerves were calm, but she woke with a heaviness in her stomach that breakfast did not soothe. She wondered if it were an omen of some kind, like a dark bird cawing at one's window, or the invitation of famine by serving bread upside down. Her Mother Superior would balk at Sabine's penchant for entertaining omens, but she never forgot how the horseshoe nailed above the door, always prong up, had seemingly swung itself upside down the day she was caught with Protestant lips on her own. Maybe God really did send signs, she thought, as she pushed her way through thick wooden doors. So what is he telling me now? "Sister Chastain," a voice called, dragging her from her thoughts. "Please hold the door." Rushing to her was a taller woman, her dark cheeks flushed as though she were exerted. She nodded to Sabine in thanks as she held the door open, allowing them both to walk through to the covered breezeway. Sabine kept her face forward, only moving her eyes to glance over at the woman. "Good morning, dear sister," she said with a smile. "Are you feeling unwell? In need of an escort to the infirmary?" The woman, Sister Esther Kumari, wiped at her brow with the back of her hand and coughed delicately. She closed her eyes and dropped her shoulders into Sabine as though she were fainting as they walked. Sabine caught her, prepared for her dramatics. They both laughed quietly as Esther straightened herself, adjusting the pleat of her habit and tucking away an unruly curl. "I was told you would be alone tonight, and I wanted to perhaps scheme with you on how to make the night go by quickly." Esther kept her head low and mouth small as she spoke, knowing that she was inviting Sabine to play a dangerous game. Sabine's smile widened at the thought. Esther, sneaking from the dormitory and into the infirmary, one of the few places in the convent open to them with an office, but more importantly, with a locking door. On normal nights, the infirmaress would carry the key on her belt as she made her rounds, or she would sit at the small desk and draw up final words for the families of the departed. But Sabine would be handed the key, only for tonight, and she and Esther would finally have a private moment. Sabine realized as Esther pulled open the infirmary door, eyes scanning the beds and walls, that she wasn't just walking her to her chores for the day to be kind. Esther was scouting out the building in the light so that she would be able to slink through the curtained-off areas in the dark. Esther was much better in the dark than Sabine. Her sense of space and recollection of where she has been has always been impressive and made her fit for sneaking. Unfortunately, Sabine's roommate was much less tolerant of others in her shared space than Esther's was, and therefore Sabine was the one forced to sneak clunkily through the halls at night. Even with her tolerance, Esther and Sabine could only be so close, so intimate, before even she would become uncomfortable. They respected that, grateful that Sister Carol only shook her head when Esther would press kisses across Sabine's face, but they craved more. Neither woman was entirely sure what exactly they were craving, but they knew they wanted to figure that out together. Of course, they knew how children were made when husband and wife were involved, and knew that their own hands could be enjoyable. So, Sabine thought, would the hands of a woman she loves be just as nice? They walked together to the office, giving Esther a chance to map out the route in her mind. Sabine entered the small room, barely big enough for a desk and a few cabinets, and grabbed some clean linen from the lowest shelf. She dropped the sheet to the floor and ground her heels into it for a moment, digging dirt into the fabric. She picked it up, rubbing the fabric together to smudge the stains so they looked less like footprints, and left the room. Handing the crumpled sheet to Esther, she closed and locked the office once more. "An excuse for why I dragged you all the way out here and away from your chores." Sabine's smile was sly and matched the conspiratory twinkle in Esther's eyes. They had to be careful. Many other women in the convent had secrets they kept, but if they were too obvious, one of them would likely be sent off to Ireland or some other far reach. Some things had to be quiet, done or said only under thick wool blankets on stormy nights, or in locked offices when the infirmaress was gone. Esther gave Sabine a quick nod and bid her a farewell. When she turned, the long skirt of her habit brushed against the end of Sabine's, and it felt as intimate as Esther's hand on her thigh. She sucked in a breath and held it for a moment, willing her heart to settle. Her body was warm, and she felt light, despite the heaviness still digging into her stomach. She reminded herself that there was no horseshoe nailed above the door here, and no one who would come knocking on it to spoil her fun. She had no patience for omens tonight.